Lawmakers today discussing a bill that would extend the government's overseas surveillance powers. The measure is called FISA, and it gives the government the power to monitor phone calls, emails, and other communications of suspected terrorist suspects. It was a hot topic back in 2008. Critics argued it could be used to target American citizens. The debate today is over whether FISA's powers should be renewed. And beyond FISA, we've already seen several bills aimed at regulating the internet to some degree. There's the Stop Online Piracy Act, better known as SOPA, and its partner, the Secure IT Act, the Protect IP Act and its brother PIPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, known as CISPA, the surveillance bill I just mentioned called FISA, and the Cybersecurity Act of 2012. So it seems there is a clear attempt to time and time again regulate the wild, wild west that is the internet. Now, the Senate is soon expected to vote on the controversial bill, CISPA. Backers say it's necessary to ensure cybersecurity, but critics say this is a dangerous bill that would wipe out internet freedoms as we know it. Senator Ron Wyden gave this warning on the House floor.
It creates uncertainty in place of trust. It erodes statutory and constitutional civil rights protections, and it creates a surveillance regime in place of a targeted, nimble cybersecurity program that is needed to truly protect our nation.
Now, despite these warnings, it seems the possible threat to our online freedoms is largely ignored or accepted by most people. But with so much of our lives being conducted online, why aren't people more bothered? To discuss this and more, I'm joined now by Rob Biskitza, managing editor of Boing Boing. Hi, Rob. So your website was one that chose to take a stand against the legislation and fight against it. And, you know, I think there it is. Boing Boing went as far as to black out the entire website for a day to fight against SOPA and PIPA. And here on the website, you say your company states that this bill would kill Boing Boing forever, put the company in legal jeopardy, and in essence, undo the internet. And, you know, many say that because of this backlash against SOPA, Congress backed down. But now we see bills like CISPA surfacing. When it first came out, they called it SOPA 2.0. Today, they're talking about FISA. So do you think that this quest to regulate the internet will continue?
I think the problem is that all of these different bills try to tackle the problem of an internet which is seen as being the Wild West, as you put it. But the problem with these kind of problem solving is in government, it's too easy for these bills to be co-opted by commercial interests, by kind of the interests of the intelligence services who would like a more expansive access to personal communications to solve their own problems. And we end up with these extremely vague, expansive, broadly worded bills which threaten individual privacy or even the commercial well-being of small businesses.
And so, Rob, as a member of the internet community, how would legislation like CISPA impact you? And what fear do you have that this could have on the internet if these bills pass?
Well, the first thing to acknowledge is that there are big differences between bills like CISPA, which was recently passed by the House of Representatives, and bills like SOPA, which is the one that we took our site down to protest. Whereas SOPA went after businesses like ours in principle, CISPA goes after individuals in as far as it allows companies to share personal data with the government without any kind of liability or any way even for people to know what's being shared about them. So the main consequence of CISPA is, as it was described by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, it's the end of meaningful privacy for anyone who has personal data stored with US-based services.
And so would you say that that's why there has been more of a backlash against SOPA and not necessarily the same to the same extent when it comes to CISPA?
Sure. SOPA was a direct attack on American businesses. Companies like from Facebook, Reddit, Boing Boing, all of us agreed that there were horrible things wrong with this bill that could hurt us. And the problem with CISPA is that because it doesn't directly attack technology services, and in fact it makes life easier for some of them, it's taken longer for there to be a grassroots opposition against CISPA, but that opposition has come up. And as time has gone by, I think a lot of sites, even sites which would benefit from CISPA in their operations and how they deal with government, have come to realize that it's very important to oppose it.
So since there isn't this corporate backlash against CISPA like we saw against SOPA, is there a danger that, although there could be harmful aspects to it, that it could kind of slip under the radar?
Well, it kind of has slipped under the radar because it's already passed in the House of Representatives. And we're at the point now where the US Senate will be formulating its own version of the bill this May. Fortunately, the White House has already indicated that it doesn't like the bill and has threatened to veto it. And the good part of that is it means that if anything happens in the Senate, it's more likely to take into account some of the substantive objections that civil liberties advocates have made to the original bill. I mean, one thing that happened with CISPA is that even though it had a long gestation process, Republicans in the House brought forward the vote by a day at the last moment to ensure that it would pass. And it's when shenanigans like that happen which I think really tip the hat and show people what the negative consequences are of letting bills like this pass.
Now, Rob, what kind of steps has your company taken, or are you willing to take to speak out against this attack on the internet? How far are you willing to go?
Well, all we can do is to inform the public, inform our readers, the best methods that they can take to oppose it. And that goes from the traditional methods like writing to your senator and raising hell with all your friends on social networks, to taking a more active role. You can donate to various charities online and otherwise make your voice heard.
All right. When it comes, we did see this backlash as we were talking about earlier. When it came to SOPA, it was Representative Lamar Smith. He was a representative from Texas. He was the one that authored this bill, but it angered many people. Yet it was just this week that he was essentially reelected. So what happened? Did the American people forget what they were angry about?
It's just relentless. As soon as one of these bills is gotten rid of, something new comes from another direction. Like I said, CISPA it's very different to SOPA and PIPA in certain respects, in that it targets different things. Its methods and its kind of enforcement regimes are all very different. But they're so expansive that they always seem to have the same effect, which is they threaten constitutional rights. For example, SOPA and PIPA threatened our constitutional rights as a website to be able to publish what we please and not have to betray our users to the security services. Whereas CISPA is more direct in that it means that internet service providers like Comcast and Verizon will be able to share personal information with the security services on request.
And Rob, backers, and there are many backers of these cybersecurity bills, say that cybersecurity is a huge deal. We have the threat of hacktivists, not only within our own country, but cyber terrorism, as it's hyped up. So the argument there is that something needs to be done to put safeguards in place to protect the American people from these attacks. What do you say to that?
Well, that's the thing, is that we've described these threats in such vague terms, and the same is true of the law. CISPA needs more precise definitions. It needs explicit protections for constitutional rights. It needs fundamental clarity about who it's aimed at. Like you mentioned domestic activists, but when the bill sponsors were asked, they talk about China and Russia. So who are these bills aimed at? What are they going to do when it comes down to sort of specific measures taken against them? For example, if you actually read the bill, it's full of very vague definitions about things like cyber threat information and cyber security systems. It sounds like a cheesy 1990s B-movie. Why don't they define these terms more explicitly? In fact, a really good example was the original version of the bill targeted intellectual property, and that's what kind of raised everyone's hackles after the whole SOPA fiasco. And when they were asked to define very precisely what they meant by intellectual property, instead of doing so, they simply removed those provisions from the bill. And you get to that point with these things where if people would rather not talk about what they mean, it looks like they really intend to reintroduce it later rather than rule it out.
All right, Rob, very interesting. Thank you very much for coming on the show today. That was Rob Biscuitza, managing editor of Boing Boing.
Thank you.